We've got a very historical episode today. We are going throughout history to take sound advice from some of history's greatest battle strategies for Commander.
I'm Mia, and I like the way books smell.
I'm BZ. I was never good at history. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom, the best way to buy Magic the Gathering cards, products, accessories, etc. All of it you can do through the link in our description so that Card Kingdom knows that you're supporting us and them and yourself at the same time.
Sealed products, single, there's a bunch of stuff. Even our recommendations are on there. Use our link, check out the page, tell them we sent you. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds
at checkout, you can save 5% on your real money tax dollars of your entire order. And thank you so much to Dragon Shield. We are actually going to be at their booth at MagicCon Amsterdam.
And thanks again to Moxfield, who sponsors every video, but there's an ad somewhere that you won't be able to predict. Make your guesses now, but you will be wrong, of course. And if you try to tell me that you guessed right, of course you must be a liar. And Patreon helps keep the channel alive because people support us, and we give them deck audits, we give them exclusive content, gameplay through Spell Table with some of our pseudo-celebrity guests, and a bunch of different stuff on there, so definitely go check it out. But Mia, we got to get into it. What is going on? What is this video going to be all about?
Today, we are going to be looking at some battle tactics from history, starting with ancient history all the way up to the current day. We're going to see how that was used in battles, and since Commander is like a battle itself, we are going to see how we can use that knowledge and apply it to the battlefield.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of strategy tips that completely are transferable, so we're going to take those, and then we're going to share them with you, and then everyone's going to win more Commander games. It's very simple. So Mia's going to be our guide throughout history, and she's going to start with the ambush.
Yes, this is part of ancient tactics. The ambush is a surprise attack by people lying in wait in a concealed position. This dates back to over 2 million years ago and as far back as hunting large game. One of the most famous ambushes was made by Arminius against the Romans at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. They took cover in forested terrain, allowing the warriors time and space to mass without detection, which is something we can actually do in Commander.
Yeah, the ambush, we're going to be trying to sneak up, try to make a surprise attack. We're not going to make our position known, but it's definitely something we can take and almost put 1-for-1 into Commander games.
We can slowly but steadily build up resources and just kind of lie in waiting, ready for the right moment to strike, which is pretty good in Commander in general. We could do this in a bunch of different ways, but one of them that I like to talk about is the Orzhov, death by 1,000 cuts way. This is gain and drain, which can be in extort triggers, aristocrat triggers, or just subtle life gain in general.
Yeah, you sit around with a Crypt Gas, you sit around with an Authority of the Consuls or a Soul Ward, and you just start building stuff up, and you're not throwing out your win conditions on turn 2 or 3 and then saying, here they are, beat them. You just sort of spend your mana, remove threats, make some efficient trades and stuff, draw cards, and then right when they least expect it, you bring the hammer.
I mean, 1 life here and there doesn't look like that much, especially on a 1-drop. People aren't really going to be rushing to remove that with a Swords to Plowshares. But overall, at turn 6 or 7, this can be a lot of life over the long run. And when you have something like Aether Flux, you can just zap down a player.
Yeah, that's sort of where the ambush comes in. It's surprise, you're dead. Actually, you don't get to react really at all as Aether Flux Reservoir resolves. I'm throwing 50 damage at you.
There's also Bolas' Citadel. With that so much life, you can be playing spells right off the top, especially if you can somehow just get a way to shuffle your library if you get a land on top, and then just keep chaining more and more spells. I mean, life is a resource.
So the other way we can take ambushes and sort of port them over to Commander is just by throwing down a very large amount of creatures or resources or blockers or attackers or whatever, all at instant speed right before we're about to take our turn. Then all of a sudden, there's no time for them to react. It's oops, this is all happening. Good examples of this, Call the Coppercoats. It makes tokens for each creature your opponents have. So you leave up 7 mana, maybe 5 mana, and you just fire it off, and it's I had 0 creatures, now I have 30.
I remember when you had your Tristani deck, that was just, you built a board, instantly gained a ton of life, and you were just kind of laying and waiting, and it was oh wait, I gained 100 life off 1 spell because I was just waiting for the right time to do it.
Yeah, classic ambush. I mean, the whole point of it is that your opponents don't have time to react, and you're going to just deliver some kind of finishing blow on them.
I remember in a recent game, I had a Chord of Calling, and that was a really good ambush because I was playing elves, and I Chord of Calling for Azuri, regenerate a bunch of stuff because I could make a ton of mana and save myself from a big board wipe.
Yeah, because I tried to play Blasphemous Act or something, and maybe Vanquish the Horde, and you're just tap for 20, Azuri, regenerate 17 creatures, and I'm well, that didn't do anything. All I did was blow up our own creatures. I ambushed myself.
The worst type of ambush, right at yourself.
Don't ambush yourself, kids. Also, I think for creature type Kindred decks, Kindred Summons is really, really good. It's if you have 3, 4, 5, some normal amount of creatures of whatever type you are, you fire this off, and now double the amount of creatures that you previously had in play. That's great for blocking. That's great for triggers. That's great for attacking next turn. It's just going to make them go, well, I wasn't ready for this. I have no mana left. I wasn't planning on you doing this. I spent all my resources already, and now I can't deal with what you're about to send at me.
To be the winner, you don't always have to be the arch enemy. You can just kind of hang out for a bit, and when everyone has exhausted the resources, just go right at it.
Yeah, so what's our next piece of like ancient battle tech that we got?
The next one is about the chariot. The chariot was a two-wheeled, horse-drawn vehicle. It was faster than other types of combat, and it allowed for long-range attacks while being like out of the range of melee attacks. Once the people who are using melee attacks were just disorganized, it could be put into formation and charge them down because it was just so big and so fast.
It was kind of like almost like a mini tank, right?
Yeah, it really was. In Egyptian warfare, it would be followed by infantry, but they delivered the first blow themselves, and they were way faster than the foot soldiers, and they could just break armies apart so everyone else could charge back in.
Yeah, if you bring a chariot to a sword fight, you're looking pretty good.
Yeah, they could either be long range with a bow or up close with a spear. And how does this relate to Commander, though? Strategies like this rely on things that are harder to interact with, and it can allow you to avoid strategies that may directly impact you, and it lets you swerve around removal.
Yeah, it's like, well, they are expecting you to come up with, regular creatures that can just, like, the default for creatures is to be targeted and be able to be taken out by a lot of things. But if you come up with threats that are not creatures or are resilient to removal in some way, then you're going to be heavily advantaged. It's almost like bringing like a knife to a gunfight, right? Like you just can't compete because you didn't bring the right stuff.
Yeah, one of the examples of this is utility lands. We always talk about how the landfall decks are always like pretty powerful because of things like social contract, and there's a lot of removal that say like destroy target non-land permanent. That's Anguished Unmaking, that's Stroke of Midnight. So I feel like a lot of lands that are incredibly powerful kind of swerve around this removal that we usually run in our decks.
And then there's also the fact that board wipes tend to reset the board. But when I fire off a board wipe, like even if someone goes farewell all modes, a Mia Largo classic, someone goes farewell all modes, swipes everything away, but the utility land player still has all their best permanents in play, and now when they rebuild, it's going to be twice as fast or twice as good because they're barely affected by it.
Having a lot of great things in the land slot, that's like your Field of the Deads, your Nykthoses, your Valakutes, that sort of thing, can really help you get around those really big board wipes and just things that would just take out most other players in all the strategies that they're playing.
Yeah, we have like token generation, damage dealing, and mana generation that's like extra. All that stuff just remains in play until you find a very specific answer. You have to Chaos Warp it. You have to like Assassin's Trophy it or something. And there's just not a lot of removal that people should even be playing that do that because most of the time you're going to be facing down creature threats.
Yeah, plus it's just with the social contract, it's sometimes hard to get rid of those because it's not like people are playing Armageddon, not that you really should be.
Yeah.
But it makes it harder to get rid of those lands that are really just taking over the game.
Well, you want to get rid of the problematic ones, but you don't want to get rid of all of them. That's like everybody can agree with that, I think. And so you got to find that balance. And it's tough, and it just means that most of the time lands are going to survive.
Yeah, plus a lot of single target removal isn't the best option in all games, so you can only run a couple of those, and then it's just like, ooh, if I draw it in the 99, maybe I'll be able to snipe that Field of the Dead over there.
Yeah, we also have like, you can use it on your own proactive cards that sort of don't give opponents a lot of information with what the choices is. One example is like Rankle, Master of Pranks. And with Rankle's ability, if you don't think that the controller of Rankle is going to choose discard and you've got a flash creature sitting in your hand and they actually do choose discard, it's too late and it just goes away. So I like making them kind of guess and having things that are not really respondable.
Choose is just a very tricky word because you can't it's not like Target where you can respond after. Another one is Breach the Multiverse. While it's resolving, everyone mills 10 and then you choose a creature to bring back. They can't exactly exile something with Soul Guide Lantern in response to it.
Yeah, or the other one, Necromantic Selection. It can put somebody's commander in play with the card from the graveyard if it's destroyed by the wipe, and that just is a weird ruling where the ability is still finished resolving. To be clear, you can respond before Rankle's ability, obviously, but once they start choosing, you can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, so it's just a little bit niche of that ruling, I guess, because people think they can respond. So using things like this that are harder to respond to, or they have to guess prior and you might not take that mode, is a better way to swerve around removal.
But we're taking a jump now in history. We're going to jump all the way up to the Middle Ages, like the medieval era of things.
We're going to siege warfare. This is offensive operations carried out to capture a fortified place. This happened a lot with like castles and that sort of thing. You sever the communications and the supply lines and deploy weapons against it, and you just get them to surrender because they're deprived of things or they're isolated.
You just like constrict them to death, and then they can't really do anything because they're not getting any new resources.
At the heart of it, this was win the siege, win the war, because at that point, siege warfare was just so decisive.
So translating this into Commander, what can we do about it? Well, we can make our opponents play slower. We can gain the upper hand, get nice tempo, get mana advantage from our plays. They can only play at the pace that we set for them. If we make that true, then they're going to have a really hard time, and then we can just speed up way ahead of them, power out our threats. Well, they're going to be catching up, deciding, do I play my spells this turn, or do I have to pay a bunch of mana into some effect just to not die?
I mean, I think Rhystic Study is one of the biggest points of this. I know you've been stuck so many times where it's like, ooh, well, I have a bauble and a 1-mana thing, and I don't have the mana to pay for all those. Do I hold back? Do I play them all right now and give them a bunch of cards? It's really about making those choices or forcing them to pay so the other people don't get that much advantage.
Yeah, and the whole time you're just constricting their resources. You're just slowing them down. Like, now, since I'm not under my own Rhystic Study, I can just play spells freely. You're under a tax of pay an extra mana per spell, depending on what kind of deck you are. You throw in Smothering Tide the same way. It's like, well, I'm going to draw 3 cards this turn. Do I want to give out 3 treasures? Like, whether they do or don't, you're going to be ahead on mana.
You and I have been stuck under the Rhystic Smothering Tithe like hold at one point. It's like, I don't want to pay 3 mana per turn just to play 1 spell and draw 1 card.
No.
That doesn't feel good, but it also doesn't feel great to give them a bunch of stuff either. And we usually pay for our Rhystics.
And then there's like the extreme version of this, which is maybe what you thought we'd go to first, like stacks and heavy taxes, where like now you're not getting any new resources each turn. You're untapping 1 land because I have Winter Orb in play, or you're a blue-white deck that has to figure out how to deal with this Blood Moon now. None of your lands make mana. You got 1 island out, and that's all you have to deal with. So like your like new resources, you're not going to be able to draw as many cards. You throw in a Narset, Parter, or Veils. Now you're like 1 card per turn. Was it the best card ever? If not, you're screwed. You're going to have to waste your whole turn.
And then there are lesser versions of this. Blind Obedience is one of them. Just making sure everything comes in tapped really shuts off people who depend on treasures a lot. People who rely on haste, like goblins, for instance.
Oh, haste. Shutting off haste is actually pretty big.
It's big. It just really shuts down their game plan. No one really considers how big 1 entire turn cycle will be to their game plan until it happens, and you're like, oh no.
Well, we talked about one of our least favorite feelings in Magic is saying just you wait till I untap, because you almost never do. It forces you to say, well, I just will wait until I untap to attack you with this thing.
But we're not saying play big stacks, play big mass land destruction, unless your deck is like really dedicated on that. We're not saying like throw Armageddon or Winter Orb into every deck that you play. But it's okay to tax your opponents here and there, or just like stop them or slow them down. You love Aura Shards, for instance.
Aura Shards is great. Aura of Silence is another one. Grave Pact is very common in the sacrifice decks. That just sort of says, you can't introduce new creatures into this game until you figure out how to answer this. And Hullbreaker Horror is a mix of all of them. It says, you're never going to resolve anything. It's like, get wrecked, noob. And now, see, for all you stacks players out there, next time somebody complains about your Aura Shards, you say, no, it's siege warfare.
Look,
the Nitpicking nerd said so.
It's different. I took it from a historical battle.
I have a source.
But we're going a little farther into history, and this is early modern warfare. This is like the beginning of gunpowder and all of that. So at that point, we're doing line formation and bayonets. Line formation is when soldiers would be placed about arm's length, and then they would just all volley fire, and so they could get out weapons, fire, and reload, so they could allow a large number of soldiers to fire without hitting fellow soldiers. But then the bayonet was introduced, and they could put this on their gun so they can fight at long range by shooting, and then also short range by stabbing. Socket bayonets were the more advanced version. They had plug bayonets to begin with, but sockets allowed them to actually fire and shoot, while plug ones didn't allow them to shoot, and they had to just put it on their gun.
Yeah, so for this one, how do you leave this to Commander? It's the flexibility of like the tools that you're using, right? Whether or not you're going to win the game is based on how flexible are your cards. Because if all of your cards only say that I can do something pretty cool 5% of the time, it's just never going to come up.
But modal spells, things you could do a little bit of everything, really helps you in the game because it lets you be way more flexible. One of these is Archdruid's Charm. We loved that from MKM.
It's like the most modal spell ever.
Yeah, it lets you tutor for a land or a creature or a fight spell or exile an artifact or enchantment, all for 3 mana. This is just like a great modal spell to have in your deck.
Yeah, it's not going to be the most efficient if you're choosing like remove an artifact or, bite something. But it's the most versatile card. It can do almost anything. It's never dead. There's never a board state where Archdruid's Charm does nothing.
Plus a 3-mana tutor, and if it's a land that you really want, you just put it onto the battlefield. That's not a bad rate.
What's crazy about that, and it's like the exception to the rule, is that is actually very efficient. So it's like kind of crazy that they also put that on there.
It depends on what you're using it for, but it's really nice to have those options because if you draw it a little bit later into the game, you might not want that land immediately, but you might need to exile something or something so it's never really dead, or you just need to tutor up your big win con like Craterhoof.
Yeah, another widely played card is Lightning Bolt. I'm not the biggest Lightning Bolt fan because it can only ever kill a small creature, but I would like to just swap it out with a Braid most of the time because a Braid just adds that, it's an extra mana, okay? You got to pay more for it every time, but you give the flexibility of answering an artifact or answering a small creature.
I feel like I use the destroyed artifact version way more than I use the Lightning Bolt option anyways, and I'm happy to pay 1 more mana to have that flexibility.
And you can't mention card versatility without me chiming in and saying, have you heard of the MDFCs from Zendikar Rising and now Modern Horizons 3 that can be lands or spells depending on what you need? If you take somebody who's playing 8 MDFCs and you put them against players who are not playing any, they're going to get flooded and screwed so much less of the time. It's going to be so noticeable because the cards in their deck, while they might not be strictly better than the cards in their opponent's decks, are more versatile.
I mean, just having the option of never having a dead draw later, if you can support this in like a 1, 2, or even sometimes 3 color deck, it's just so nice to have. Also, Koglahan's Command and Prismari Command, I know you really like those, but just for a couple mana and being able to choose those as you please has been very nice to see in games.
With some instants that are removal spells, you don't really want to be able to, like a disaster scenario is to hold up all the mana for the spell, plan on casting it with no backup, and then just not ever needing, like having no reason to cast it, which kind of sucks. But any of these, Kolaghan's Command, you can fire off and to get a creature back and make somebody discard if there's nothing else to do. You can play for Prismari Command to draw 2, discard 2, find an answer, make a treasure if there's no artifacts or creatures to blow up.
I've seen this and it's just always so nice. I feel like if I played more decks that were less colors, I would definitely be running these. It's so nice to have this flexibility.
Yeah, Mia only plays like 4 color decks. It's like all she does.
It's also great to have the flexibility of having more spells in your deck that do the thing or reward you for doing the thing quickly while playing. One of this is like Evolution Sage and Flux Channeler in your proliferate decks that rely on like 1/1 counters or poison or something. Of course you're going to be playing lands, so why not have something that rewards you for playing lands by helping you achieve your game plan?
Yeah, and then Frantic Search is a great card because it always sort of like gets you out of a hole that you're in, whether you're mana flooded or mana screwed. It throws away extra cards, or you can throw creatures that you want to reanimate later, and it all just does it for basically 0. And you can also get more mana if you have like a bounce land or something.
Having this flexibility is super great in your deck, and it just allows you to play to your theme while also just having just good quality cards in here and that reward you as playing. But we're going a little bit further, and this is World War I, when trench warfare was the big type of warfare made. Trenches were dug into the ground and it protected people against things like noxious gases and also machine guns. These battles were slow, gruesome, and it was hard to break through, but to break these stalemates, there were trench raids. This forced temporary entry into the enemy's line to kill defenders, destroy fortifications, and gain intelligence for the battle overall. So to think about this, it's consider the strengths of your deck and the best way you can break through if a stalemate happens, which usually happens if there's a big like combat focus of your games.
I know games get really board stalled in Commander. Resources are piling up and nobody seems to be able to make a move, and that's when you want to play like your board buster. Like what is going to crack all the blockers, take them all down, make your creatures unblockable, flying, evasion, one-sided board wipes, these kind of things, right?
Even a minor break in defense can really help you win the game, even just at that one little time. One of these versions is like a Chroma's Will or Craterhoof. A Chroma, even if you could crack through once and give your protection from everything, that could gain you a ton of life and also just take out one player, like the biggest threat.
Usually, bare minimum, a Chroma's Will is I've never seen it take out less than 2 players. Usually it's like, oh, game over. Like you can mix ambush in too. It's like surprise, a Chroma's Will. It's like, I thought we were all just chilling.
Craterhoof gives Trample, which is one of the versions of like Evasion. This is like your Moonshakers too, that just really help you get through, because it's always so rough when you have a bunch of little 1/1 chump blockers on the opponent's side. It's like, okay, these are easy to be spared, and you have like these 10/10 creatures. You're like, oh well, it's really hard to get through, right?
Yeah, there's even simple stuff like Githzerai Monk. It just taps all your opponent's creatures. You can fire that off on the end step before you take your turn, or just on your turn if you draw it. There's like modal board wipes, where if my creatures are all tokens, I can use Austere Command, blow up all your big stuff, blow up all your artifacts. Now you're in trouble, and I'm going to attack you for a bunch.
I remember that, I love Farewell for a multitude of reasons, but especially if you're playing against like a big artifact and enchantments deck, and you're just like have a bunch of creatures. Like, okay, well, the Shurikai deck, it's like all of the vehicles are gone, and then it's also like the Sithis deck, all of your enchantments are gone, and I have a bunch of creatures and you have maybe 2.
The other way to break board stalls is you could fire off a symmetrical board wipe and then just rebuild faster than everybody else. If I go Blasphemous Act or Vanquish the Horde, I only spent 1 or 2 mana. I can spend the rest of the time getting my board intact first.
I have that with vampires. I can just like throw down a bunch of cheap vampires, like Dusk Legion Zealot, draw a card, throw down another one, and keep that kind of chain going. So even after a symmetrical board wipe, I'll still have a bigger and better board than the rest of my opponents.
And I have a bigger and better sponsor than the rest of our opponents, because Moxfield.com is coming in with the best deck building website. Now, there's no way to connect this to our subject matter. I don't have the brain power to do that. But if you want to figure it out, whatever. Moxfield will help you win battles. There we go.
You can see your CMC, and whether that's high or low, you can see how fast you can actually rebuild, maybe faster than your opponents. Go check out our profile. You can see all of our decks there.
Yeah, it's really fun. You can follow us. If you follow us, good things will happen to you. Can I say that? That's true, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you'll be happier because you're going to be using a great deck building website.
We love Moxfield. We love the dark mode.
All right, next we got World War II. What is our method from this era?
There is code breaking of this era, because you're going to be decrypting code and cipher messages by unauthorized people. And because we had code breaking in World War II, we gave the Allies a big advantage and shortened the war by estimates say about 2 years.
That's actually pretty huge. I feel like Commander games could be shortened by about 2 years. So how does this relate?
People can often bluff in Commander because it's a lot about what you say, not just the cards you play in there. So paying attention to what they do, what they reveal, and how they're going to win can really help you know what to counter, what to save, and just like what type of things to hold back.
I feel like some decks don't really give you too much of a complicated code to break. It's like they're playing a will help deck. Well, then I know I have to make a quick assessment in my brain before we start playing that I'm going to be expecting Zombie Apocalypse, Gravecrawler, possibly with sack outlets for infinites. Almost every will help deck has that. And also Rooftop Storm. I'm going to have to figure out maybe my opening hand, I really want to see an artifact or enchantment removal in it.
Or if you are playing against my Edgar deck, for instance, and someone says we really need a board wipe, and I'm not that concerned. I might have Clever Concealment in my hand. I might have Tybalt's Trickery, or I could just be bluffing. And it's just, if I only have a couple cards in hand, it's probably more likely that I'm bluffing. But if you are worried about that, and I don't seem too worried, maybe you should keep up a counter spell, because I might have something in hand.
Yeah, I think everybody has a few tells, and I'm as I've played over 100 games with Mia, I'm starting to learn some of hers, and if I have a really dumb board that's kind of obnoxious with a bunch of creatures in it, if Mia isn't campaigning super hard for someone to destroy all my creatures, I think she has something, either a blowout survival spell, like a Teferi's Protection, or a Farewell in her hand that she's going to fire off when she untaps.
So if you have something like that, either make them use what they have, or just save a counterspell and check their reactions. You can ask what win cons people have in their deck so you know kind of what to expect. Maybe if you're saying oh, this is a deck that relies a lot on flash, maybe you need to keep up a little bit more interaction. And then just keep an eye out, personally, what you think would hurt them the most in your deck and how they are reacting to the possibility of that happening. Yeah,
I think another thing that's important that you don't want to miss out on free percentage points is just to keep track of visible zones and known information. If somebody, I have a Niv Mizzet deck. If I reveal 4 cards and one of them's a board wipe, you got to make a mental note that there's a board wipe and something's going to happen later. Or if someone's got a Dread Return in their graveyard, got to watch out, because if you just kill their best creature, they can get it back and you might look a little silly. And then Sivine's Reclamation, kind of the same thing.
We've seen so much of that where people just kind of oh, if it's gone, it's dead, and it's not really coming out. So well, I feel there's so many cards now where you're actually, unless it's exiled, it's probably has an option of returning, whether it's on my side or your side.
Yeah, it's oh, this thing has Flashback, this thing has Escape now, or they milled 10 cards cards? Did you even look at what they were? Like, they could have been important things.
Yeah, so, Bojuka Bach is always pretty good to have, and you should always aim at the player who not only can utilize it, but sometimes just who has the best graveyard to begin with so other people can't take advantage of it.
All right, I think that brings us up to modern day, correct?
Yes, this is cyber warfare, which is happening, here and there, and there's propaganda attacks, and people can manipulate information or public perception towards a certain point of view to discredit targets, change outcomes of electronic votes, or even spread civil unrest. It's reported that 2/3 of the European Union citizens report coming across fake news at least once a week, and I feel like I see a lot of fake news too.
It's just a whole market for it. I mean, we're not going to get into like exact things, but just in general, people spread misinformation all the time.
Yeah, so making people doubt things in Commander can help you gain favor and have other people focus their efforts against another person instead of you.
Yeah, this despite being propaganda, doesn't have anything to do with the card propaganda. Propaganda falls under different. It's more of like taxing mana, I think. Siege warfare.
Yeah, but this is closer to like, say someone has a really scary threat out, like an Elish Norn. Maybe you don't really care about your creatures that much, but being like, that's really scary, maybe someone should get rid of it, might cause someone who has a lot of little creatures to get rid of it, thus burning a removal spell that might have come at you, and also getting something off the field that might have hurt you a little bit more, but it might have been hurting them even more.
Yeah, if there's a threat in play that's really scary for me, something I like doing is just pointing out what a different player can't do because that's out, and I kind of just I start a sentence and I go like, oh, Elish Norn's in play. Oh, but you've got a way to make a bunch of tokens. Oh, but they would just die because of Elish Norn. Like, oh, I guess you can't do that. And they're like, well, I want to do that. So sometimes it works where they're like, fine, I'll kill it. And I'm like, great, that unlocks my thing.
Yeah.
I didn't care about your token thing.
As long as you're not the only one at the table who actually runs removal, there is a chance that someone else can burn their removal to remove the thing that you want gone too. You can also give them the choice to distrust others. I know we've used Druid of Purification before, and it can never hurt your stuff, which is really great. And it'll always get rid of the thing you want gone most because you always can choose. However, people don't really like losing out on free value. So I've played it, really nuke the biggest thing, and then BZ's had like signets, for instance, and they're like, I guess I'll get rid of your Arcane Signet and Dimir Signet because why not? It's kind of free to.
Yeah, even in times where I've been the arch enemy, casting Druid of Purification, always just like, people are out here catching strays with the Druid of Purification. It's like, oh, well, fine. I'll blow up your Hedron Archive. And it's like, why? And then now they're just mad at each other, and you can just sort of like spread the seeds of chaos, even though you're just playing a card that's very, very good. Really, people should be mad at you for playing it, but that is not often what happens.
People get a little bit more distrustful. It's like, well, I blew up my thing, so I'll blow up your thing the next chance I get. It's like, well, I'm like, my hands are clean of this. Technically, they're not, but you guys are aiming at each other. I'll just do my game plan in the background. Expropriate's another one of these because, in the normal case scenario, it's like you get an extra turn, everyone else gives you permanence. But if someone has a permanent they really don't want to lose, they might give you an extra turn instead because like, oh, but I could win if I keep this, and they can't get rid of it. And the other player's like, why would you do that? So it really like kind of sows the seeds of distrust among the table.
That's more the seeds of distrust in my life. We're not even playing Commander anymore because let me tell you, Expropriate, where someone chooses the wrong mode, the game's over. So there's not much game to wallow in your sadness left. But next game, I'm probably going to trust you to make choices less.
So in that, it's like just swaying the perception of the players might take the heat off you a little bit and might make them aim at each other.
Oh, yeah. I love my 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the time, I'm telling the truth and I'm trying to help the game out. 20% of the time, I'm a little gremlin who's just trying to make his own way to win.
Commander's about the cards you play and the way you play, too. So mixing a bunch of strategies like this can really help you up your game overall.
If you want more Commander tips, if you're looking for MH3 recommendations, we ranked every single rare and mythic rare in the whole set in a tier list, and it was sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. So if you want to go like or comment on that video and give it a watch, we'd appreciate it.